And begin in three, two. Hey, y'all. It's my turn for introductions. We are at it once again at Will and Jerod Make a Game. In this episode, we are going to contrive what we think about different religion. Does it have a place in this game? And if it does, what does it mean? Because there's a lot of different things we're working with, including something called the Force that we're not quite sure what it is. And as always, we can't have the name. My name's Jerod, and I am part of Proxism by Design, where I publish my own games, but I also do editing, writing. My biggest claim to fame so far is Goblin Market, the role playing game. Check it out on Gamicon's website, which brings in my esteemed colleague, Will.
Hi, I'm Will with Gamenomicon. You might know me from games like Party First, or Warmer in the Winter, or a big pile of one-page solo journaling games, all powered by the second guest system.
And this is going to be not useful to you at all, but this is something that we both need to get really better about. Don't you have a game coming out right now?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, sort of, yes. I say sort of because maybe we haven't discussed heavily about release schedule on this. Have you been posting the videos to YouTube? I rarely get on YouTube.
Whoa, no, I'm talking about your Zine Quest game.
I know. The reason I bring this up is I haven't released any of the podcasts, like any of these recordings as podcast episodes yet. So by the time people listen to this, which I
Oh,
assume at the rate we're going is a few months down the road, ZeneQuest will be long
oh
gone.
yeah, yeah, 100%. But that being said, I think it's worth saying.
Sure, sure. Well, currently running on Kickstarter, sometime in the past, is Lord of Terror, which is my attempt to. Every game I've put out based on the second guest system has tried to take this very slimmed down one page solo game and twist it and do something weird with it that maybe it would have seemed at first glance like that system couldn't do. So this is my attempt to turn it into a 20-ish page dungeon crawler with combat and character creation and advancement. And I think I've worked out a pretty cool way to handle that in the context of a journaling game. So fingers crossed that it funds.
Fingers crossed. I hope it's going to go well, buddy. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Uh, and yeah, today we are trying to figure out, or at least explore more options. I know I have a vision in my head about what I think about the setting in the world and religion in it. I think I've got a pretty solid handle on it with a ton of growth to go within it. Now, stating that, let's start with you. Do you have an idea? Maybe run down the timeline, I guess, or should I do that
Yeah.
part? What do you think?
Either or. I was thinking about popping in to tell listeners, just in case this discussion ever seems forced or like we skipped over stuff we would normally debate. We had a bunch of this discussion already through Discord and in the Google Doc, and that was when Jerod was like, wait a minute. This would make a great podcast episode. So bear with us that we're retreading this ground, please.
So, one of the core ideas to the setting is that there is something called the Force, and I tied it in chronological order of this world in vague terms, right? We don't have anything nailed down. Is there, and this is Will's idea, which I really like, that there were a few sects of people that had access and could manipulate or sense or use some sort of magical force, some sort of thing out there. And then in our setting, a singularity happens where AI becomes sentient. It goes around, blows up a bunch of stuff, takes all of quote unquote forbidden information away from other sentient species, and then just takes off with it. They're like, this is not for you. We're taking our ball and we're going home. Shortly after that, cultures around the galaxy start experiencing some strange phenomenon that goes from like levitating babies to people being able to see the future to quote unquote miracles um, happening. And that's the world that we're going to play with. And so now we're going to try and figure out like, how does religion play a part in this? And how much of it do we want to have in here?
Yeah, I think some of this Jerod may have even fast forwarded a little bit to some measure of synthesis that we've ended on, because I think part of what we did discuss previously in Discord and such is I think initially the two of us had different concepts of kind of where this was, and it took a little bit of hashing out before we realized we were thinking two slightly different things. So, like Jerod mentioned in the previous episode, I had kind of pushed for the inclusion of things like mysticism, and it really felt like, to me, when I think of this kind of swashbuckling space fantasy type of thing, some sort of spirituality, magic, mysticism, whatever, like is an important piece of that concept to me. So when we were talking it through, we were working on trying to hammer out a certain number of races. I think what we settled on 8 in the end, if I remember right.
Sounds about right.
That part's not.
It's right around there.
That part's not important. I started writing up I don't know. It's probably 5-6 paragraphs worth of backstory for some of the ones I was working on and whatever. And right from the get-go, I'm like, oh, okay, like, hey, this race had this view of, I started calling it essence, just so we would quit calling it the Force and cribbing from Star Wars. We definitely knew that was not going to be the final name. But I know Jerod and I had talked about wanting there to be uncertainty about what it really was, where it really started, and that type of thing. And so in my mind, I took it in the direction of, hey, all of these different races have kind of different interpretations and different histories with it, and that started kind of in their systems or whatever. And now, as time has gone, people have conquered other, species, homeworlds, and things have traveled back and forth. And now it's all muddied up, and it's hard to say for sure, whose history was the first or who influenced who and that type of thing. On the other hand, and sorry if I'm speaking here for you, Jerod then recently had thrown in some comments here about kind of some machine cult type of stuff and some questions about maybe some atheist or agnostic-ish or adjacent sort of groups that pointed specifically to that AI singularity. And that's when I kind of had this like jolt, like we just hit each other, and I was like, wait a minute. And that's when we had to kind of work out, I think, some synthesis that is more the endpoint that Jerod kind of elaborated so far. That to recap that in a nutshell now, yes, there are rumors centuries, millennia, or whatever ago that this force, this energy was accessible, and different groups had done some things with it, but it faded out over time for reasons I don't think we're going to touch on.
No,
and that
I think something that we can throw in there that I thought about earlier today is that if we're going to have these all-powerful company, war machine type company places, we could easily just make it like, well, there just wasn't any room for that type of thinking while they were
Oh yeah,
dominating the marketplace. Like we could just make it easy like that, and then once
there you
they
go.
got dismantled,
They crowded it out.
yeah, and then we're in our current renaissance right now.
Yeah. There's
Um,
a lot of that corporate war machine gone amok in the background story before the game is set. So yeah, that totally makes sense to me. Just like everybody was just grist in that mill and kind of extra like self-edifying beliefs outside of that. There just wasn't room for that anymore.
yeah,
Okay.
I like that part. Like it was pretty grim before we got to where we're at now, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, and that was another kind of related discussion I had. Like, can I clarify here? Because some of this stuff is pointing toward, kind of current dystopia or very recent, like,
oh yeah.
Warhammer 40K stuff. Are how close are we still to that? Or like, I thought we had kind of moved into this new golden age afterward. Where do we want to land?
Oh no, we are. We're in that Renaissance golden era at some
Yeah, yeah,
point. But
yeah. You
we
definitely
gotta
answered
get
that,
into
but
it first, right? It's gotta be all bad if we're
yeah.
gonna have Renaissance. And that's one interesting thing working with a partner on a game is that um so Will had tossed out Essence for the naming of it because there are literally pages and pages of notes in different naming conventions for the Force. Going back and forth on different stuff, trying to figure out what we could do it. Um, and I know you landed on Essence a little bit earlier, which I think is fine. I mean, and I'll come back to this in a second because I'm at the point where I'm like, I like it within context. And I think this is where working with a partner ends up bringing better flavor to a game. So I was coming um, with the whole idea of the spark. And I remember when one of the earlier times when we were trying to think of something, I got really excited about Soul Spark. I'm like, yeah, we could
Mm,
call it like that, like it's Soul Spark or whatever. And then you're like,
yeah.
wait, did you not watch Transformers? I was like, what do you mean? And then I
Well,
looked
I
it
think
up.
it's the all spark there,
Oh, that
but
was, oh
it's
yeah,
still just the sound is so close. That's all I could think about.
yeah, that's fair. Um, but I'm still okay with like just the spark on there, with the idea that um, because the singularity happened so close to the expansion or the realization that this power is out there, is that there's a not small percentage of people that put it squarely on the idea that the AI that came to be were the heralds of the power and maybe even drawing the power from them. Now, again, I 100% am going with we don't know. I like that it's not explained. We don't have to explain it. That's not our job, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Our job is to set up interesting questions, not to answer all of them.
Yep.
At
And
least
so
that's how I view settings.
I 100% agree on this part. And now I think where we've gotten to a really nice settlement is instead of just saying, all right, it's called Essence, it's called Spark, it's going to be called everything. And the problem with that, though, is that we are going to have to settle and just pick one thing specifically to keep
Yeah,
referencing it, right?
the rules need to be able to reference one thing, but the in-game cultures could reference multiples.
Yep, which is a where we come in with the different ideas of like with the species that we've worked on, um, different belief systems and all that. Now, I am absolutely willing to go with Essence. Um, I mean, we have a whole list of stuff. But yeah, I don't mind Essence as the standard word for it because it's a very rich and diverse world that we're looking at. and I think you can call it essence as part of what was I like followers were called the uniformists or the unionists. The
The
unionists.
Unionists is one of the factions, yeah.
Yeah. And I was thinking like that would be the um more popular, but it's more of your traditional sort of we believe in this power and we think it does come from a higher power. Does that sound reasonable to work with?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right on board. Once we realized we kind of had started in two different places, I think we started combining stuff, and I think are at a pretty decent spot with a split between, like Jerod said, the Unionists very much, hey, this is what we were talking about the whole time, it's back, whatever, we don't know the reasons, we can never know the reasons, it's ineffable. Oh, you have an idea?
Well, actually, something that I think about for the unionists is that they are that's come from a higher power, but they're not the people, the different sects that had access to it this whole time. They're more of now
Oh,
seeing it for the first time, going like, yes, this is proof that we've all been kind of looking for, but we never had. And then we can all become one through this power because parts of the mysticism abilities are like bonding, like kind of connecting with each other, right? This is the sort of stuff that I think we want to talk about when we talk about essence, right? Is that the whole point, starting point for this game was like the Three Musketeers, one for all and all for one. And if we
yeah.
can weave that into our religious themes as well for the most populous religion, I really like that idea. Like maybe the goal is to become one or put a
I like
consciousness
it.
into a unionist,
Oh man,
but they're not the hardcore old school believers. What? Oh
I
no.
just I
Oh.
just thought of the Transformers again, till all are one. The
Hey,
kind of
well then
famous
they stole it from the
catchphrase from the
Musketeers.
cartoon anyway. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, that was just when it hit me, more subtle Transformer references. I'm okay with that, though. But yeah.
Hey, did no one tell you we're making Transformers the role playing game? Is that not what we were doing here?
I'm in. I'm in. I love the Transformers. Anyway, sorry. I got distracted there.
So that was my thought for the Unionists, that it wasn't they weren't the ones that have always been doing it. However, that's interesting that if they were the ones that were doing it or had access to it the whole time, is that now they've just taken on a huge groundswell of going like, see, told you. Um, but I like them, the people that have been having access to it, I like them to be more like your power in the background type religions or something like that.
Uh, See, well, maybe we've got a little more to iron out. I
Yeah.
thought from the earlier discussion we'd kind of settled on it had kind of died out everywhere. Like it had existed in some factions, had died out everywhere.
Yeah.
And then now has sprung up again after the singularity. So, in that understanding, there would not be any of the factions that has been using it the whole time, so to speak. But
Oh,
if
I thought you were
if you
implying
are,
that yeah, that through the whole time. Now it wouldn't be much, and they wouldn't be a
yeah,
known faction per se, just like rumors
okay,
of like, oh, hey, I
okay,
heard these people can do this.
yeah, I'm okay with that. Then yeah, I mean that still plays in with the what I had been thinking from our discussion about. Yeah, there are stories, like historically speaking, these religious groups say, oh yeah, we used to have lots of access, blah blah blah, and then for whatever reason over the centuries it dropped down. Now it's rumors or whatever. I had sort of been thinking that it cut off completely and now has sprung up, but I'm totally good with, yeah, there are maybe some secretive tiny sects, or there's rumors that so and so on some mining asteroid had a miracle happen or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a hundred
that sounds
hundred
great.
percent. And then we also, during the company wars or whatever we end up calling that, there is rumor 100% of a person wielding this glowing hammer or whatever and smashing the machinery, right? Very communistic type imagery, right?
Oh,
But
see, I thought Luddite when you said smashing the machinery.
sure, yeah, like also that too, right? But then that's why we can also call them the unionists too, smashing the
Mm-hmm.
machinery, power back to the people, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want this to make this a game all about like socialism versus capitalism or anything like that.
Right, right.
It
And there
it's
is
very
something to be said if we go too hard on that smiting and whatever, that loops us back in that like Warhammer direction that we were
yeah,
kind of talking about.
yeah, yep. And I don't want to make it all about that. I think we've obviously made our cases for how we think it'll end up. But that being said, um, yeah, and so I really like the idea of the union. So either way, like they're going to be the most populous, and they're going to call it Essence, right?
Okay.
So by
Yeah.
default, Essence will be the common name that's used.
Okay.
Sound good?
Sounds good to me. I was all set to abdicate to Spark as the general rule term, but if you're good with Essence,
Eh,
I'm excited.
you know what's going to happen 100%. We're just going to both be like, you know what? We're calling it Harmony, calling it a day, whatever.
That's a good name too, honestly.
Yeah. I know we have a
It
just a
really
huge
is.
list, but nothing has just beat me over the head yet. So it's still possible to change, I guess. So that being said, yes, we're both huge fans of having religion in this game because I don't think in Party First we have to avoid it so much because of the absolute atrocities that happened in the name of religion or to ban religion.
It's yeah, it's so
Um,
close to a real world setting that I felt it was best to stay out of that part of things.
yep, yep, and I totally agree. I don't see any problem with it. Like one of the things that we could easily do there is like more like priests and preachers and stuff like that in game, and we still leave that alone. We're just doing something else instead. That being said, in this game, that's completely our own thing that we're putting together. We still do have a basis though. Like if we're doing Three Musketeers, I still want some of the things based on a little bit of the French Revolution and stuff like that. So something that I requested with the idea was working with was it the Huguenots and the Catholics
Hmm.
during the time. And so it was just like Protestants, basically, but we don't have to call them
Yeah.
Protestants, and they're not going to be Protestants. So we just need to come up with a handful of other religious factions. Now, one of the easiest factions for me to nail down is the Machine Head. Like these are people that truly believe that the AI is the reason that the essence is back, and they call it the spark. That spark came back. It's all through everyone. You commune to the machine head by net running within the computer to reach the oracles. There is wild rogue AI still around um, that protects information and also is just like a monster too. Um, there's a lot of interesting things that we can work with in this game about what's human, what's not human, what does it mean to be human in machines within this. And so there's 100% going to be a faction and not a small one that's going to be Machine Head. And I'm very comfortable with calling them Cult of the Machine Head. I don't like is cult too strong of a word, or would you just call it the machine head? Because it doesn't
I,
have to be negative, does it, to be a cult?
I mean, I don't think it. I don't think it has to actively be negative. Um, it could just be kind of fringe to. I mean, and you could still be fringe and be relatively populous in like in the size of the galaxy or whatever.
Yeah,
Um, but fringe compared to the more dominant, say to the unionists or whatever, like yeah, like it gets named a cult because that's the language the unionists use for anybody that's not them or whatever. And um, I think it also sort of works. One of the other factors that we had been talking about was you had pointed out not wanting to totally like shoehorn any of the various species into any specific thing, not just religious, but other stuff too, that like this is what this whole species is or whatever. And one of the ways that kind of touched on religion being um that it's maybe too clean and too narrow like that to say, hey, this religion started with this race and this one and this one and that type of thing. So one of the things that really makes sense to me about the Machine Head or the cult of the Machine Head that I think helps liven that up, because for the kind of social structure tied into the idea of the Unionists, I feel like it needs a pretty defined starting point and a like hierarchical structure and all of that in order to stand in for the Catholic Church. But the Machine Head, you've already and I do specifically mean you, Jerod, have come up with the lace as kind of this internet adjacent sort of idea, the interconnected system and running and stuff. So like I love the idea that it's a very kind of decentralized movement. Like, oh, so and so saw this forum post on the lace and it referenced, this other thing and this, and like, man, it's all coming together. Don't you see? It's the machines. Like this like organic nebulous growth of it. Like I think that fits perfectly.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Although there is probably also not a small percentage of neckbeards in this cult, but that's also probably fine.
Mm,
I think there's going to be a
they've
lot of
got to go somewhere,
Matrix.
right?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of Matrix references for sure. But I also like the idea that it's the machines that are the gods that are doing it. That machines are awesome. I think that's a nice touch. Um, what else are we looking at here?
Well, this one I think is not as fleshed out on my side, but you bring up the Catholic versus Protestant split, which I'm going to stick with saying so I don't butcher the French pronunciation
Yeah,
of the H's, right?
yeah.
And so I started looking at that, especially after you were kind of pressing me more about not shoehorning species too much. And instead, I started thinking, how do you kind of contrast that with the Unionists that are kind of this, at least for what we have written so far, yes, it kind of has a defined starting place and some hierarchy, but it doesn't have a central figure, so to speak. It's this we're all one sort of concept, more of a kind of
Spirituality sort of thing.
yeah. Just kind of a vague spirituality at the moment. Like we're all part of this, not like one person, pointed the right way type of thing.
Right.
So it seemed to fit to me. You flip that and you come up with another faction that has similar sort of overlapping beliefs. We're all together and whatever, but instead really has a like central figure. Hey, this person
Okay.
like has the right teaching and that sort of thing.
Ooh.
So I started kind of looking at that as kind of maybe combining some of the other things I had written initially on some of the species, and like, wait a minute, what if these were literally the same figure in all of them, and it was like a traveling like nomad band of ships, this like caravan or whatever, going around proselytizing everywhere. And so, yeah, I mean, you can sort of point to a single point in that there's a person, but like species wise, it's spread all over because this person is out traveling, I'd honestly maybe even make this figure still like alive and traveling
Yeah.
in the current day.
What's interesting that like we've come up with our different species is that we haven't put any age limits on anyone, even like the transhuman, humanish
Mm-hmm.
people. Like they could just be augmented through the gills, and maybe the human stand-in the species lives for a very long time too. Um,
Yeah.
and I like this idea. I coined the phrase "star tribes" when writing about the
Mm.
transhumans the other day.
Uh-huh.
And so that could be maybe one of the first instances of a star tribe. Like it's just
Yeah.
this person cruising around to the different, back when interstellar travel was a little bit more accessible, um, hitting up these different planets and yeah, proselytizing. Do you have a name you want to work with? Or like, we're not going to call it Dianetics.
Yeah, faction wise, I like for the organization or whatever, I don't think I'd actually hit on one. I There were a couple of the species, I kind of lumped in there as some of the first stops. And I was kicking around the name Milthara, or maybe the more generic title of the Enlightened one for the figure. I don't know if you just expand that outward for the group to be the Miltharans or the Enlightened Ones, or the Enlightened. I don't
I
know. I'm open to playing around with it.
I really like the phrase miracle workers. Now that could be
Mm-hmm.
something, another different little faction that we can do on the side. Because the miracle workers are just people that all of a sudden had found out they had spontaneous powers and abilities, right?
Yeah, yeah. I
Um,
saw your blurb, just a sentence or two about that. I thought that was what you kind of meant. Like these are like, I don't know, hedge witches, so to speak, like just
yeah,
random, like popping up here and there, like not really associated with the bigger groups. But if you want to work
yeah.
them in,
I don't know. I don't know. Right now, yeah, they're just that. They're just kind of a thought that we're looking at. Like say, miracle workers and charlatans next to each other. I like. I think enlightened might be a little bit too generic. It's been used quite a
yeah,
bit for religions. Um, but what was the name? So I want to get that down.
Milthara
Nilthara.
was the name at the moment,
Okay,
and I'm not like deeply attached to that name by any means. Just kicking stuff around.
sure. And so they're what's different about them for their beliefs is that they don't believe that it's coming from Milthara, do they?
Oh, that the essence
Yeah.
specifically was um that that is not the specific angle I had thought of. We could go that way, but I was thinking of it um
It's like a prophet.
more in keeping them, yeah, more in line of keeping them and the unionists as like estranged sisters, so to speak. The followers of Milthar are still very like, hey, we're all connected by this force, and so on and so forth. But they're like, no, you specifically have to follow Milthara's teachings in order to access it and whatever. And the unionists are like, no, like we've got centuries of tradition and like everybody can do this or that or the other and whatever. And so they butt heads over kind of this one like tenet of their theology, even though a lot of the underlying stuff is the same.
Would it be more interesting if the Miltharists were the ones that had more of the continuing power throughout everything? Smaller faction,
Yeah, yeah.
in that, and then they named Miltharist as a living saint.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
then,
That sounds
and
good to
so that
me.
that's the other thing. It's
And then oh, keep going, keep going.
so they're saying living saint. So not saying that all the power is coming from Milthar or anything like that,
Right.
but living saint. And then the Unionists are like, no, no, no. Hey, man, no one's a saint, right? We're all just trying
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
one.
Well, you can play that into the like rumors and stuff. They can be like, "Oh man, I hear Mothara's like caravan hit, space station 11 or whatever,
Yeah.
and there was this miraculous healing or whatnot, and word gets down line to the, I don't know, unionist bishop or whatever equivalent, and he's like, these clearly these are all rumors. Milthara is a charlatan. No one's been able to access essence for centuries or whatever. I like that. I like that.
All right. Perfect. Milthara, the living saint. Perfect. I don't know if you want to call it Miltharis or whatever, but I'll let you name that one.
Okay, I'll play around with it and see if something else comes up, or if I change my mind on Milthara. Like
Sure.
it to me, it kind of has that mysterious sort of
Yeah.
ancient kind of quality to it, but it also is a little awkward on the tongue. So
Yeah, there's that too. But so is Methuselah. So what do you want?
that's
And
true.
that's the other
That's
thing
true.
too. Like Milthara, I love the idea. Like, well, no, Milthara has been around forever. Have they? Or is someone else just picking up the mantle of being Milthara? Who knows?
Oh,
We
right.
don't. Who knows?
Well,
We're not going to
and
answer
that,
that.
yeah, actually, that kind of plays into some stuff I had dropped from the initial drafts,
Oh yeah.
where with the enlightened one, who
Hmm.
was going to be had started a sect on one of the specific home worlds and
Hmm.
such, and part of the background there was that like records are really spotty about who or what this was. Was it even like a member of this species? Was it one figure? Was like, did they get replaced over the centuries or like whatever? So like, yeah, I had kind of just dropped that when I started
Sure.
merging and recombining stuff, but maybe that type of thing plays in well.
I love that it's like a totally different species every couple, 50 to 100 years. And people are like,
Yeah,
no, it's the same one for sure. Just be like,
yeah,
oh, okay. All right.
I guess so.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think that's fun. I really like this idea is that so the reason another big reason that we're talking about this is that we're talking about the idea of backgrounds and what do they belong in the game or not. And I really love the idea of one of the four major backgrounds or cultural professions, stratus, I'm not quite sure what to call it, but is a religious background. I love the idea of military, religion, academia, and then I just call it high society slash the the other one, the underground society. And I love that like those are the skills or groups of people that are the most important to this setting. And I love that religion's in there because I think it brings a lot of interesting thoughts. We can do a lot of interesting things in it. That's why sci-fi is one of the greatest mediums in the world, because we can talk about stuff if we really want to. We can
Yeah,
also just make up stuff too, and it's a lot of fun.
and it ties it, I think, really well back in. Like, religion is an important piece of the Three Musketeers, and if that was kind of the
Yeah.
inspiring part of this, of course you've got Cardinal Richelieu as the antagonist, which comes with the whole religious apparatus for him. But you've also got um, Aramis, who is torn between, I feel like I should become a priest, but like I'm torn by like love and like the thrill of the fight, and that's not appropriate, and like wrestling with that type of thing is baked right into that source.
And I love like I am seriously really starting to fall in love with this setting and the mechanics to this game because like you can make an Aramis type figure mechanically in storyline and have it work really well. And there hasn't been any other game that I've ever played where you can take those two ideas of the penitent warrior, right? And he's also the lady killer. Like
Yeah.
he's
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
quirky, he's the guy with the silver tongue, and like you can make that exact character in this game. All those things don't have to be separate. They can all be the same in the same character. And I'm loving this idea of of putting this all together. I think religion is going
Yeah.
to be an important part to it.
Well, and it. hopefully this is not going too far out into different topics, but I do just want to take a second to say you brought up backgrounds and such, and I know that's another ongoing discussion we've got with backgrounds and not possibly, almost certainly at this point, some kind of dramatic past and various pieces of stuff. And it occurs to me also that type of thing, particularly the dramatic pasts, really works well for like an ethos type character who has had was previously a very, let's say, steadfast and devout person, and devoted to his love and to his God and so on, and had this moment that like broke him. And by the time you get to the book, he is a very different, bitter atheist, that doesn't believe in love and so on. And like much like you can build an Aramis, like I think this is headed in a direction where you could build a really good ethos. And for what it's worth, I think Porthos maybe takes a little less interesting mechanics, but I'm confident you could build a fun Porthos too.
His taunt skill should be really high.
Oh, yes, it should. Oh, man. Oh, crap. Now, I think you realize now that once the game is like done 90% whatever, like to the point where we might want to record an actual play like for the Kickstarter or something, you know what we need to do, right? The player characters should just be XPs of the Three Musketeers.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah
That's fair.
I think that would be super fun.
Awesome. Well, I love this idea. I love that we're including this mystical force, the essence, into religion, and I also love that it's also just a scientific discovery for people too. Like, I think that should be another faction too, that they're a faction. They're not necessarily religious, but they're just like, oh yeah, it exists, and here's how we can use it, and this is why it's useful.
Yeah. The I don't know, the name pops into my head, the mechanicalists. Like, just in that everything is a very just kind of scientific mechanical process to them. They're just very matter of fact about it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I like that. We need some sort of mechanicus type people.
Mechanists.
So before we
maybe that rolls off the tongue more easily.
So before we get down to totally off the rails here, I know we're trying to keep things tight. But I hope this gets people excited, and I think we're doing this in a somewhat respectful way. I don't think we're stepping on any toes per se. We're just trying.
Yeah, I hope so.
We're just trying to figure out like what the origins of our different factions should be. And I like the idea that some people believe in this living saint thing. I think is a very interesting. Has a lot of legs to it. We've got the unionist. That's more of your general. It's kind of bland right now, but we'll flesh it out for sure.
Yeah.
Be your more populist. The cult of the machine head. They believe that the power is coming from the AI. Then you've got your Scientologist type people, kind of.
Yeah.
Obviously, you won't go that direction. That can use it and are looking to power things, because that does bring up. Yeah, go.
Oh, I was just going to say that there was one other one that I was looking at in the write-up I've got that, I don't know, maybe it doesn't have a home in the end, or maybe we kind of table a decision on whether it does, but in one of the other initial ones I had done, I think still has some legs to be kind of unique in that you had created one of the species. Was it the Othen or Othen, whichever way I should say that?
The beetle type people.
Yeah, that had previously been really like warlike and conquering and stuff. So I had kind of looked at like, well, what if they were conquering and they had some like rudimentary beliefs that like were not very developed, but they conquered, this other species and this other species, and they started kind of synthesizing and combining and like pulling from different stuff. To some extent, I had sort of thought at the what I had written right now was kind of the end. That was kind of the end point. Like, oh, it started in maybe 3 or 4 different places, and because of this historical conquering empire, it pulled things together, and so you kind of wind up with it spread and kind of melting pot sort of thing everywhere. The thought occurs to me now, like, is there maybe room for that? I do realize now I had given it a name, the Weavers, like they're weaving everything together as kind of a mishmash. Like, is there room, or would it make sense maybe for that to still exist? Maybe, not the conquering empire, but maybe there's still this religious group that just, like, every time there's some new development, some new belief, it's just like, you know what? Yoink, we'll take that. We'll take that. They're like, yeah, Milthara is totally a living saint. Now, you don't have to follow Milthara, like, you really, this other stuff and whatever, but I don't know. I'm just kicking around if that has legs and has room.
Okay, so yes, it for sure has legs. Something we can play with for sure. Now, one thing I do want to point out real quick. So, weavers right now is a term being used in the game. I
Okay.
know that
Should
they
not
put it
double
in
use
there.
that.
Yeah, unfortunately, because that's going to be used for the name of the people that go into the lace.
Oh,
Um,
yes. Yeah.
because they're going to
Gotcha.
be weaving the lace. Um, Now that being said, though, so yeah, so the Othin at some point in time were this, like, I'd never wanted to use the word hive mind because it's so overdone with insect type um,
Yeah.
species. But what if we do this? What if we go with the hive mind at the beginning? And like this is all stuff that will probably never make the book, but I like building out this sort of stuff. And you're right, they go out, they conquer, they start grabbing stuff, they start pulling together the hive mind to feed for whatever purpose, right? Something happens. Don't know what it is. It could go all the way back to the singularity, and like the essence all of a sudden begins. They have right now, maybe that's part of their religion, which is just the all-consuming religion, right? The all eaters,
Yeah.
the whatever it is. Something happens. They lose, or they find something that they cannot amalgamate, right?
Okay. Okay.
It's something so foreign even to them, so alien that even though they've conquered all these different galaxies, they get to this like, all right, it's not, and they somehow break free of the hive mind, and now a lot of their energy is now turned. I can't say they for everyone, right? But
Right. Right.
after the hive mind stopped or whatever, the majority of them now thinking for themselves for the first time are now incredibly repentant and aggressively so. After
Mm-hmm.
realizing how many eons that they've done for destruction, they're now on the path of healing. There's an
Ooh,
ability in the
and
game.
that
There's
could
an
play with the kind of synthesis amalgamation thing. Like they're out trying to make amends. They're like, no, no, don't fight over these different beliefs or whatever. Like we can find a way to like combine them all like harmoniously. That could
may,
work.
maybe they're trying to form the harmony. Maybe we can use a
Yeah.
card that we've kind of
Okay.
discarded,
Yeah.
bring it back around. So they're trying to create the harmony, and there's an ability in the game that like I, we don't have any abilities tied to species, but in the back of my head, I've always tied this to the Othin, whereas they will take damage to heal other people. Like that's how far that their faith has gone into trying to be helpers, and they'll hurt themselves in order to help other people. Um, and then like combining it with your ideas of going out there and then retracting for their kind of the spark of that religion, which it was just in the hive mind, right? The all-consuming or the
Mm-hmm.
amalgamated, whatever you want to call it. It was just in that, but then once the hive mind broke, we can come up with whatever we want to for that reason. It's now spread to other species and other cultures. They're like, actually, this makes a lot of sense. We're trying to form
Yeah,
a harmony.
that sounds good. That sounds good. And I apologize if you saw like weird, confused, or frowny faces on me here just now. I that had nothing to do with what you were saying. That was me fighting Google Docs
Oh
to
no,
go in and change the Weavers to say the harmony at least at the
oh,
moment, so we didn't forget that. So anyway,
sure. Right on. Yeah, I think that's another good one. That's fun. That I like this idea too, is where it started species centric, but it's now spread out. And now the Oathens can also be whatever religion they really want to be, but we're saying, hey, this is probably where it started.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I like having a mix of kind of some of these very centralized, some more decentralized. I think it just feels more realistic to have several variations on that.
I agree. I agree. And what's going to be fascinating is that we're going to build up all this lore and all this history or whatever, and then it'll end up being like 3 paragraphs in the book. But
Yeah,
hey,
yeah. There's a lot of this that is going to have to be very brief for space.
well, maybe, maybe that's stretch goals. Maybe they'll just be an accompanying book that's all just System Prime lore. Like, how
Yeah,
amazing would that
there we
be?
go. Lore dump the book.
Amazing. Whew. Uh, what do you got? You got anything else? Because that was a great bring
Yeah, no, I think that hammers out pretty much everything. A well above and beyond the stuff we'd already hit on,
up.
Discord and Google Docs. So I think that was great.
Yeah, I think we're in a really happy place with it. And we'll have to figure out how organized all the religions are going from. Well, we don't have to, I guess, right? We don't have to. They just exist, and we can go from there. So, right on. Well, hey, thank you again for sitting down. I know we didn't have a sign off for last time, uh, but if we were going to name this episode, what would we name it?
Uh, Faith or fiction is the one that comes to my mind.
All right, that sounds good. I'm going to go with, boy, bugs are people too. That's what I got. Hey, thanks everyone for listening. My name is Jerod Leopold,
I'm Will.
and we're Will and Jerod making a game. Bye.
Okay.